Brothers and sisters, I've been doing so much playtesting and calculations for the last few days that I'm literally about to go numb. And so I figured it's probably my turn to jump into the kitchen to cook up a tier list. As you can already tell, I am going to use Prydwen's as a base because it's fun to review somebody else's opinion as well, instead of just cooking by myself. Hi, today let's talk through this tier list, where I agree, where I disagree, where I do think that some level of commentary is required because a tier list can only tell you so much. And to be honest, if you don't watch anything else today, at least watch the Nicole part because she is a god and somehow she is at the bottom over here. Alright, that said, I will be assuming 0 dupes because at this point in the game, most people are going to not have dupes today, and so I feel it's most fair to compare at that level. However, as the months go on, we will start looking at M4, M6 kind of thing. But my guys, before I get into the tier list itself, I do want to make one note, and it's that no matter what I say here today, in terms of investment, I would invest into pretty much everyone in this circle. So from T1 and above, here like that, except for Piper. Now, if you do know how to play Piper, as well as Anton and Corin, then absolutely would recommend invest into them as well. And I say this because it's really important you understand the mechanics. For example, for Piper, Anomaly, there is like an order in which you have to inflict the debuffs to maximize your damage. And then in terms of Ben himself, I still don't understand this guy, man. He is actually enigmatic. I have playtested him, but I've not playtested him enough. Like, he kind of looks like a stunner, but he's also really freaking slow. To be honest, I still haven't come to a recommendation for him. Even though he has this synergy with Koleda, I still would probably just kind of leave him. However, I do see a lot of people actually having a lot of success with him, having cleared Shiyu defense with him. My guys, you guys know more than me in that regard. I just don't know much about Ben, that's all. But in terms of Billy down here, unfortunately, old mate, I love this guy, but physical attribute DPS is just way too crowded. If I had to choose a physical DPS, I'd probably run Corin instead. All right, and so with that being said, let's undo all of those changes and get back to the tier list itself. Starting off with Ellen versus these crit-based DPSs. That is a very, very big gap, my guys. Like, when I first saw this ranking, I was like, wow, she can't be that much better. That's a huge gap. But then I actually got to play her, and I pulled her, and I played her some more. And unfortunately, or fortunately, I don't know how you want to put it, she absolutely is a cut above the rest of the characters. I can absolutely agree with that. Now, what I'm not sure about is this gap, right? They're saying that there's like a whole tier in between them. I honestly would love another DPS character to kind of be able to assess this gap, like if Yuan, if she was released, so we can actually have a little bit more data points. And so yeah, whilst I can agree that Ellen is absolutely like a T0, she is a cut above the rest, the reason that she's up there is actually relatively simple. She just does more damage. That said though, she is a little bit more complex to play, so do take that into consideration, but that is absolutely not to say that these two down here are bad. For me personally, I crushed most of the game with 11, and I only got Ellen towards the end. And as for Nekomiya, she absolutely does get cracked out. I've playtested her so much. And in most aspects, they're actually really similar. Like I said, it's just the matter of damage. They all deal a load of attribute damage, which means that they contribute towards the building of Anomaly. They're all relatively mobile. There is no mobility issues, although 11 is probably the slowest between all of them. Their area of effect when they do attack is quite similar. They can cover both AoE and single target, although 11's is a little bit more narrow, especially with the ult. So yeah, it really just comes down to damage. In terms of this hierarchy, absolutely Ellen, and then Nekomata and Soldier 11. The gap, I'm still not sure it's that big. It is quite big, but I don't know if it's like a whole tier. All right, and so with that out of the way, let's talk about Grace, who's now in Anomaly DPS, which are essentially your debuffers. She's really interesting, right? And you're gonna see her rated pretty highly, especially on the CN tier lists, because she can dish out a lot of damage. However, if you don't have the rest of her team, so I'm talking Grace, I'm talking Piper, I'm talking Rina, I'm talking potentially Anby as well, some kind of combination of these members, she essentially needs team members who have really fast build up and maybe even preferably in another element to help trigger disorder. If you don't have the rest of her team, for me personally, I'm not sure that she can be rated at T0.5. I reckon at best, she's T1. She might even be lower than these two over here. Now, I'm not saying Grace is trash, just hear me out, my guys. The first thing is that Grace, I believe, is probably one of the more future-proof units. And the reason is because she is an electric anomaly DPS. Now, Electric Anomaly does this like shock thing, and it's really freaking strong because it does extra ticks on top of the base damage. So it ticks an extra 6 times when you're able to trigger Disorder with Grace as the first debuffer. However, aside from Piper, we just don't have those options right now, so it's quite hard to evaluate her. So what I will say is that with her team, I do believe that she can be a T0.5. However, without the team, I think it's a T1 for sure. And for those of you who are familiar with Star Rail and the dot DPSs, I think that this is certainly that kind of situation. It's the whole Kafka and Black Swan and having to synergize to do big damage. I mean, that's pretty much what Anomaly and Disorder is all about. All right, next, I want to talk about these two over here, Lycaon as well as Koleda. I think that this is not correct. I do think that Koleda is actually at least T0.5. I do agree that Lycaon is slightly better. As for these two, they're probably two of my most played characters. And so the first thing, the most obvious thing is, well, how are they in terms of stunning? I would say that if you can play both correctly and post Koleda stun bug fix, so for those of you who didn't know, Koleda actually generated less days than she was meant to. I think that in terms of fulfillment of their role as a stun unit, they both days generate about the same. What is nice about Lycaon though, is that he does have on-demand ice damage, which means that he can help contribute towards the shatter, towards the build-up of the anomaly debuff. But in practice, if you do know how to use Koleda as well, she can do the same. And the hint is pretty much her dodge counter. Her dodge counter is the absolute juice in both stunning as well as building up the fire burn debuff. So my guys, if you are feeling that your Koleda is doing not as well in terms of burn or in terms of stunning, dodge, counter. Not dodge attack, dodge counter. So perfect dodge and counter. As far as I can tell, that is her best move. And so what that does mean though, is that you shouldn't parry with her on the field. You should dodge and counter. Or you could go from your DPS or your support and go into a parry into Koleda. Speaking of dodge counters, Lycaon's actually is not that great, so I would look elsewhere in terms of the best rotation. All right, next we've got their auxiliary skills, kind of the skills outside of the stunning. And I gotta say, in terms of their passives, Lycaon's is absolutely fantastic. 35% extra damage on the stun multiplier. And this is battling against Koleda's 35% times 2 potentially on the chain attack. Now, the thing about Koleda's is that you can actually multiply it by 2 to get up to 70% more chain attack damage. However, what I would say is that Lycaon's is just more flexible because what you can do is you can drop your ults and you can drop your EX skills whilst the boss is in the stunned, like the burst window. The other thing is that that effect is actually unconditional, whereas Koleda's is dependent on her using her EX skill up to 2 times. And so the last thing I wanted to talk about between these two are their attack strings. Now, this guy attacks ultra fast, which means that he gets more damage in and he can kind of like parry out faster. He's a little bit more reactive versus Koleda's, which is a little bit slower. Maybe you get like 1, 2, like N1, N2 of her string, and then you have to parry immediately already. But that's not the real thing I wanted to talk about. I think everyone knows by now, if you are a Koleda player, she has an iframe like towards the end of her string where she just jumps into the air and nothing seems to hit her. Now, if you are big brained, I think you can really exploit this and, you know, work some magic with it, right? For me, I get confused because I want to kind of like dodge counter, but I reckon that there is just more tech and more optimization that you can do with that. That said though, in this game, you primarily don't want to rely on iframes unless you're about to get screwed, right? Or unless you're doing damage. Like if you use your EX skill on any character, typically you're doing damage, you're doing days, and you're getting an iframe as well. You need to kind of weigh it up to see if iframing is worth doing the alternative, which is a dodge counter. In Koleda's case, I think dodge counter is all the way. I think for all characters, dodge counter is always the way. All right, so TLDR, Koleda, I do think that she should be T0.5 quite strongly. And I do think that she is slightly above Anby, although I think Anby is also really strong as well. Moving on, we're gonna be talking about support life, which is pretty interesting because this is probably where I disagree the most. I think that Soukaku is slightly overrated right now. And don't get me wrong, my guys, I do think that she is great for sure. Her attack buff is awesome, but especially in early game, it's not like godly. I think that this tier list takes into account like the best in slots. Like you can see it's all ice characters over here. Everyone knows that ice is the best team right now. I don't think that's a fair way to kind of put characters in these positions, because you're going to need some really good luck to get all 3 of these characters. Like what happens if I don't have Ellen, but I do have Lycaon and I do have Soukaku? Does she still belong in T0? I don't think so. Now, that being said, with Ellen, absolutely, she is absolutely a T0 support for Ellen, especially thanks to the plus 20% ice damage from her passive, which is actually freaking massive. But in isolation, I think she probably belongs in T0.5. Here is who I think is the star of the whole damn show, Nicole. And I think that she should also be at a T0.5. I think that she has been disrespected so hard since the beginning of the game, because as you can see, there is an arrow over here, right? So she was actually in T2 before she got moved up to T1. I think she's still being disrespected and should be T0.5 without consideration for Juyuan or for any other attackers, because she's just so incredibly good. So let's just start off with what she is known for, which is that chunky defense down. Now, with a tiny bit of investment, tiny bit, you can get 34% defense down for about 5 to 7 seconds, depending on whether you use the EX charge skill or the chain attack. And so the next thing is the suck. And this vacuum is actually really freaking big and catches a lot of mobs, especially for like your Soldier 11 or the more narrow attackers. It lets you AoE and cleave just super effectively. Now, it's not a venti vortex, but it is really helpful, especially in the context of Shiyu defense. But my guys, all of those things are really awesome, but I don't think that is the main reason as to why I would say that she is a T0.5. For me, it is because all of that utility is actually locked behind extremely low investment. Like for Nicole, you only have to level herself up and unlock the core passives. That's it. Maybe slap on some like level 0 support matrices, and she is literally good to go. On the other hand though, Soukaku over here, her attack buff is dependent on her own attack, which means that you need to level herself up. You need to level up her core passive to boost the ratio from like 10% up to 17% or whatever, which you have to do with Nicole anyway. But on top of that, you have to do the weapon for more base attack, and you might have to do her artifacts, her relics, whatever those things are called as well, for more attack, so that you can get as much attack as possible to scale. Especially at this point in the game where resources have to be planned so freaking well. Those are probably resources that you should be investing into your DPS or potentially your second team, and not into your Soukaku. And so it's for that reason that I do think that Nicole deserves to be at least T0.5, and that Soukaku is kind of overrated. Like in ice context, sure, I get it. But in isolation, which most people are going to be playing right now, like imagine if you didn't have Ellen. Do you level up Nicole or Soukaku? For me, it's 100% Nicole. And then lastly, we've got Rina over here. So the one right in the middle, our only S rank support. Her pen ratio looks really good on paper, and depending on the rest of the penetration percentage ratios you got, it might get even better. But I think in almost all cases, especially early game, Nicole's defense down is simply better than that penetration. Like at max, the penetration from Rina is at 30%, and the defense down from Nicole is at 40%. In terms of calculations, the defense down makes more sense. However, I'm not saying that Rina is dog, right? Because she has her own niche. So at this point in the game, I do think that Rina is probably more of a T1 character. I think that both Soukaku as well as Nicole are better than Rina. However, if you do combine her with Old Maid Grace over here, I think she is T0. I think she is truly worthy of T0, just like how Soukaku, if you combine with Ellen, is worthy of T0. There is something about Rina that really surprised me when I was playtesting her, and it's that her anomaly buildup is extremely fast. Now, that's not to say that the others aren't. Nicole's is as well, but it just really shocked me. Get it? How fast Rina was able to build shock. And where it makes sense, it actually makes a lot of sense, right? Because her passive also supports that. All right, and so I want to talk about Piper next. And Piper is a really interesting one because I think she is closer to Grace than we think. Her skill and her inflicting of the anomaly stuff, like the assault, is actually really freaking fast. Depending on who you ask, you know, Grace could be down here, which is what I think, or Piper might actually be up there. But the speed at which she accumulates the assault status debuff it actually just shocked the hell out of me. Okay, I'm not gonna make that joke again, but it really surprised me. Now, that being said, I'm not sure there's too much in kind of like all of these characters to kind of support her kit, because we have the Shocker supporter over here for Grace, less so for Assault. However, there is one synergy, which is Piper with Nekomata over here. That being said though, I would probably almost always run her with Grace. Now, as for Anby, I'm not going to talk too much about her. I think she is just so incredibly important in the game right now. There is no other shock stunner. She's easy to use, she's fast, she is solid, she is worthy of investment. In my opinion, she is a cut below Koleda, but honestly, not that far. So if Koleda was up here at T0.5, Anby would be T1, but it really isn't that far. And then the last person I'm going to cover off today is Lucy. Now, Lucy's a really interesting one because she has minions, she gives buffs, but she also does damage. I think that she being a hybrid type, she is going to fall out of favor in terms of the support. I think today, Lucy is fantastic and she is absolutely fulfilling a niche that we all really, really freaking need. But I do feel like she is going to be one of the first ones to kind of fall out. And so yeah, I'm going to quickly go through the last two over here. Corin, I think her DPS may actually exceed these ones over here in T1. However, the conditions are a little bit more niche, right? You really can only pull it off when the boss is in the stunned mode. And then on the other hand, we've got Anton over here. I kind of missed him when I was mentioning the Grace teammates, but he absolutely is one of the other ones that could be paired up with them. Now, Anton without Grace though, I don't know, man. I don't know about that. I think it's kind of like I would only play Anton if I had Grace. But if I had Grace, I wouldn't necessarily play Anton, right? I'd probably play Piper instead. And so it's for that reason why I'm kind of like hesitant and why I'm kind of okay with him being in the T2. All right, my guys, I hope you have enjoyed this session of painting with your boy Lace. I'll give a quick summary as to all of the changes that I would make. Nicole up to T0.5, Soukaku down to 0.5, Rina down to T1 over here, Grace potentially over here, or Piper up here, and then Koleda up to T0.5. And then these two, I'm still umming and eyeing about T0.5. I do think that Ellen is like giga cracked. Yeah, to be honest, I think this is pretty fair. That gap is actually really freaking big. But yeah, my guys, I guess that's kind of it. Now, do remember that this is more of a discussion, and I really wanted to focus more about these points rather than their placements, right? Because at the end of the day, we can't choose who we pull unless they're limited, right? Like I couldn't choose to get Lycaon. I ended up with Koleda. And so I'm hoping that the commentary is more of what you're going to take away. Now, what I would be interested in is if you did agree or disagree with any of the commentary, or if you did have more to add, then I would really appreciate it if you left it down in the comments below. However, that is going to take us to the end of the video. So thank you guys so much for watching. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.